Hello, everyone. This is Lamo, and this is the third episode of the Look at My Opinion podcast. I got a lot of shit I'm going to talk about today. And the first thing I'm going to talk about is how smaller means more skilled is a terrible argument, just as well as saying bigger means more skilled is a terrible argument. It's okay to evaluate techniques across divisions, and I think that there is a misconception that because people like me and several others, really rate flyweights and bantamweights, that we're saying that, oh, they're better because they're little and they can move their bodies at a faster rate. Whenever that's not what we're saying at all. What we're saying is that these people are better because they display better skill in all phases of the fight. You watch someone like TJ Dillashaw strike, and you go, oh, hey, look, that guy's objectively better than any heavyweight we've ever seen at striking. And it's not because he's faster. It's because that he incorporates kicks more. He has better combination work. He uses angles. He feints. He's looking for more areas to attack and more ways to attack than anyone that's ever existed in the heavyweight division. In one day, there's going to be a heavyweight that can do things like TJ Dillashaw does, and you're going to be like, oh shit, well, I guess those fighters did suck. And you all understand then. Josh Emmett is not a better wrestler than Daniel Cormier. Dustin Kimura is not a better striker than Robert Whittaker. Israel Adesanya is a better striker than anyone I've seen in a lower division. The point of saying all this is that it's irrational to say that a person in a smaller division is automatically going to be better because they're smaller and they can move faster. No one's comparing the speed or the strength of these people. We're comparing the techniques they use and how they use it against top competition for their weight class. It's very simple. So if you see me say, hey, DC's not an elite striker because he can't block body shots, he doesn't set up his punches very well, he doesn't counter, and he doesn't throw a lot of kicks, I'm not saying he sucks at MMA. What I'm saying is that he's not as good as these other strikers in lower divisions because of his fundamentals. And no matter how many times you guys tell me, oh, well, big guys just have more balance issues than little guys, all I'm ever going to say to you is watch Tyson Fury box. I mean, just watch a 6'9", huge giant of a human being move like a middleweight, and then you understand, hey, it's just athleticism. It's just skill. So, I don't say this to shit on heavyweights. I don't say this to shit on anyone who devotes their life training how to fight. I respect all of these people. But I'm not going to sit here and lie and say, okay, well, just because Stipe Miocic's 6'5", that means he has an excuse for not being able to be as good of a striker as Jose Aldo. And that leads me into my next topic. Demetrius Johnson is better at rematches than John Jones. Oh, I know. John Jones is known for killing people in rematches. How could you dare say that? Well, I simply just look at their fight history and then I look at how they adapted for the rematches. John Jones has 2 rematches, while Demetrius Johnson has 4 rematches. And we're going to get into all of those. John Jones fought Alexander Gustafsson the first time at UFC 165 in what's considered probably the best light heavyweight title match of all time. Great fight. John Jones showed the heart of a champion. He was able to steal a 4th round that he was badly losing with a spinning elbow, which is some of those moments that, you can't predict. It's just something that was dug out, and he was spamming the elbow before then, but Gustafsson just walked into it anyway, got rocked, and that stole the round for Jones, and, in my opinion, won him the fight. It was a great fight, back and forth. Both guys had success. Alexander Gustafsson took the outside on Jones and jabbed his way in, took advantage of Jones reacting badly to feints, and was able to expose that. Alexander dropped this decision, but followed up this performance with a really good performance over, at the time, surging prospect Jimmy Manuwa. Now, everything looked like it was going to line up. We've seen contenders get rematches instantly before. We've seen contenders definitely get rematches after one fight. I mean, Conor McGregor is going to get a rematch with Khabib because he knocked out Cowboy at 170 pounds. It's really stupid. But I think the main reason Alexander Gustafsson didn't get a rematch as quickly as he should have is because enter Daniel Cormier. Daniel Cormier came to the light heavyweight division. He was scheduled to fight Rashad Evans. Rashad pulled out, and he ended up fighting Patrick Cummins and Dan Henderson, which, not really too like, hey, he should fight for the title things, but DC was a known commodity. He had a real rivalry with Jones, and that sells more. So they were going to push DC to the forefront, ignore Alexander Gustafsson for the meantime, and Alexander Gustafsson had to take a fight with Rumble Johnson. And Alexander Gustafsson got countered off a front kick, smashed into oblivion, and that set Alexander Gustafsson back pretty far. And from there, a combination of the DC Jones rivalry, Jones legal issues, Alexander Gustafsson just never got a crack at the title until 5 years later, after he had been through multiple wars, taken a lot of damage, and he just wasn't the same fighter. And this is pretty evident with how Gustafsson chose to approach the Jones rematch. If you watch the first Gus fight with Jones, he took the outside. He was jabbing a lot, feinting a lot, trying to find these openings on John. But in the rematch, it seemed like his only concern was to walk forward and try to land up top on Jones. He didn't go to the body hardly. He didn't kick as much as he did. He was just only trying to punch and only trying to headhunt. And that's just not something that we saw out of Alexander Gustafsson. That's probably because he was over the hill and because he got injured in that fight. So Jones ended up crushing him, in my opinion. He stayed out of range of all the headshots that Gus was going for and ended up getting a takedown in the third round and TKOing him. It was a good performance, but we really have to look at the context. Gus didn't get his rematch till years later after many wars, and he had a weird game plan going into it. So props to John, but it's not like Gus was in his prime, and it's not like Gus came in and fought a great fight the second time. And the next fight we can get into is Jon Jones versus DC, and that's his second rematch in his career. DC's a fantastic fighter. Those are great wins, especially how Jones finished him in the second fight. And I don't really have a lot to say because DC still, I wouldn't say he's in his athletic prime because he started MMA as his athletic prime was declining, but he was still a good enough fighter to where we can look at that performance and go, oh, that was great. But it is important to note that Jones beat DC comfortably the first time. It wasn't like it was a back and forth fight where Jones had to make adjustments. Jones just capitalized on a noticeable flaw that Henry Hoof discovered whenever Rumble Johnson fought DC. The only difference is Jon Jones' defensive wrestling is way better than Rumble Johnson, so he's able to keep it on the feet and exploit this weakness even more. So that's two rematches. Two rematches in his entire career against one guy who's way past his prime, and the second against a guy that he beat comfortably the first time. And now we can get into Demetrious Johnson, who has 4 rematches, and I think that they're pretty impressive, especially when you look at the level of competition and where these fighters were at the time that he rematched them. The first one is Ian McCall, and they went to a draw. And actually, it's pretty funny. I went back and watched the fight before I recorded this podcast, and it was read as a majority decision win for DJ. And they didn't even correct it until after they were out of the cage, and they came up to him afterwards and said, "Hey, man, it's a draw." Which it's got to be disheartening to hear that. But yeah, anyway, DJ wobbled McCall early. I posted that on Twitter if you haven't checked that out. When he was striking off the clinch, he grabbed a single through the right hand, and it was perfectly placed. The second round was closely contested, so it was a toss-up in the eyes of many, but I scored it for Johnson. And then McCall, late in the third round, was able to land ground and pound, like a lot of ground and pound, and almost get the fight stopped. And I think that's what made it a draw to the judges. Likely gave him a 10-8 for that round because the fight could have been stopped. DJ wasn't hurt, per se, but he was just kind of flopping around like, hey, I'm kind of stuck here, you know? So because it was a draw, the UFC booked the rematch for 2 to 3 months later. So McCall's still in his prime. He's still a good fighter. Remember, in the first fight, McCall was able to secure points by getting takedowns. This is the old unified rules, so simply getting a takedown and holding control for a minute or two can actually outweigh a lot of damage done on the feet, which is why they changed it, because that's really stupid. The rematch happened 2 to 3 months later, so DJ only had a limited amount of time to watch the first fight, make adjustments, and well-round his game to the point to where he can comfortably beat McCall, ideally, right? So DJ comes into the rematch with way better awareness in the clinch. He's able to reverse positions much better, get out of bad positions much quicker, and comfortably outstrike McCall on the feet for a comfortable decision win. This is an example of a guy who had difficulty in the first fight with certain aspects and able to put a more well-rounded performance on and convincingly beat someone not even 2 to 3 months later. And the next rematch we can get into is the Joseph Benavidez fight. Joseph Benavidez is considered one of the greatest flyweights ever, and he is just unfortunate enough to be in a division where Demetrious Johnson ruled during his prime. And this fight was closely contested. I've seen a lot of people score it for Benavidez. I've seen a lot of people score it for DJ. So it was a toss-up split decision. One one of the best flyweight title fights. I suggest going to watch it. A lot of skill on display here, and it's just a fantastic fight. And then Demetrius Johnson defends his title 2 more times, and then a year later, not 5 years, not 2 years or 3 years, 1 year later, he fights Joseph Benavidez for a second time. So Joseph Benavidez is still in his prime. He's still a top flyweight. At this point, he's on a winning streak. And Johnson puts on, in my opinion, one of the greatest championship rematch performances ever. Joseph Benavidez winds up on punches. He's done it his whole career. But the problem is that Joseph Benavidez usually has good setup for these punches. So DJ pushed the action early, kicked his leg, and then only a couple of minutes into the round, DJ pushes him back, and when Benavidez goes to load up on strikes, Demetrius counters Benavidez with a straight punch down the pipe. Perfect on the chin. Benavidez goes out, knockout, first round, DJ. This is an example of someone really reading their opponent and a year later being able to pull off one of the best knockouts in flyweight title fight history against one of the best flyweights ever. I can't understate how important this win is for DJ's legacy. Keep in mind, Joseph Benavidez was on a 2-fight finish streak, 3-fight win streak. Joseph Benavidez was in his prime. He was ready for Demetrius Johnson a second time. But Demetrius, being the GOAT that he is, was able to read that and put him away early. It was such a statement at the time. Like, who's going to beat this guy? And the third rematch we can get into is John Dodson. John Dodson and DJ 1 is a really, really good fight. And in some people's eyes, it's one of the best flyweight champion fights ever to exist. I recommend watching it. It's great. Dodson drops him a couple of times. DJ does a good job of keeping range. And Dodson did a good job of making DJ respect his power. And that fight was closely contested. I didn't find many people who scored it for Dodson. It seems to be a clear DJ win. But make no mistake, that was a competitive flyweight fight that was very closely contested. And then 2 years later, not 5 years, not 3 years, 2 years later, Dodson, in that time, goes on a 3-fight win streak with 2 finishes in the top of the division. And then he fights Demetrius Johnson for a second time. John Dodson's still in his prime. John Dodson's still technically sound. And he's done well at flyweight outside of fighting Demetrius Johnson. Considering the first fight was pretty close, you'd think this is going to be a good one, right? Well, DJ, being the GOAT that he is just too damn good. He's made all the reads on Dodson, and he completely shuts him out in probably one of the most one-sided of his performances. DJ did a great job of using defense at range, avoided all of Dodson's power punches, and then drained him in the clinch. It was just a masterful performance in a rematch. And these types of dominating rematches from Johnson, in a weird way, hurt his standing in the eyes of casuals. When he runs through someone that's on a good win streak like that and someone that had took him to the brink the first time, it's like, damn, I guess no one's as good as this guy, so I guess the division's bad. But if you look at it in context, Benavidez and Dodson were both doing well, really well, finishing guys at the top of the flyweight division, and then they ran into DJ the second time, and they just got shut down. And then we can go into DJ's 4th rematch of his career, Henry Cejudo. As we all know, Henry Cejudo, Olympic gold medalist, one of the best prospects in MMA ever. One of the best prospects. Because Henry Cejudo not only won gold at the Olympics, but then he spent several years going through Golden Gloves competitions to actually get a striking background. So when Henry Cejudo was scheduled to fight DJ, people thought it was too early, but there was also some intrigue there because DJ has historically struggled with people who can get takedowns. And who better else to get takedowns on him than an Olympic gold medalist in wrestling, the youngest ever. So we all know what happened. Henry Cejudo came into that fight, and he got washed. He got absolutely washed. To that point, Henry Cejudo was able to navigate the clinch with any opponent he had faced, and then DJ just kneed him in the stomach, and then in the head, and finished him in a round. That is just crazy. The fact that someone can be such a good prospect, such a good athlete, and DJ just deal with them like that. And then 2 years later, not 5 years later, 2 years later, DJ fights Henry Cejudo for a second time, and Henry Cejudo was noticeably different in his mixed martial arts game. Everyone noticed it. Henry Cejudo went from a pretty good fighter who resembled a Muay Thai fighter. Now he was adapting more of a karate wide base stance and timing his straight. And due to his athleticism and just overall fight IQ, he was able to time this straight to many people. And he arguably beat Joseph Benavidez in that time as well. So the rematch comes around, and we all saw that fight. One of the best fights I've seen between two insanely skilled athletes. And DJ lost by split decision in a decision that I think he shouldn't have lost. Now, if the unified rules were still the same version that we used to have, there is a good argument for DJ losing because he was taken down and held there. But the new unified rules, is what was in place whenever they fought, DJ doesn't lose that fight. DJ did way more damage, and the only success Cejudo had when he got the takedowns was getting a grip with his hands and holding him there. He didn't pass guard. He didn't land barely any strikes, do any damage from the top. And DJ was doing all the damage on the feet. And due to that, I really do think that if you use the new unified rules and score it correctly, I think DJ wins. Sometimes decisions don't go your way. Sometimes the judges get it wrong. And it was a close, competitive fight between two highly skilled athletes. So Cejudo got the nod. But you have to take into context what Cejudo has become since then. Cejudo has become a double weight champion, one of the best fighters in the sport. He has wins over TJ Dillashaw and Marlon Moraes. I mean, he's one of the best we've ever seen do it at this point. And that pretty much covers it for their rematches. I think that DJ not only has more rematches where he's proven more statements, every person that he rematched was in their prime. Every person that he rematched had time to fight new opponents, get more skills, and still be in their athletic prime. And DJ just completely put a masterclass on them in the second fight. So it's not even particularly close to me. I think DJ has shown to be much better in rematches than Jon Jones. As with the case with Jon Jones, he always gets the credit. So that's how the majority of people are going to see that. You never hear about DJ making adjustments in rematches. You never hear about how good he is in rematches. But at least once a month, you're going to hear about how Jon Jones is great in rematches. And I'm not saying he's not. He obviously is. But I don't think it's even close to the level of DJ. As with a lot of things about mixed martial arts. Like, if Jon Jones gets a rematch with Dominic Reyes within a year or two, that is like DJ beating Benavidez or Dodson or any of the people that he beat in the rematches. That's a guy who pushed him to the brink the first time, beat him in my opinion, and the opinion of many. And then, while Dominic Reyes is still in his athletic prime, Jon Jones just shuts him down and beats him. That's the type of thing that we've seen out of DJ more than twice. We've never seen that out of Jon Jones. So yeah, let me know in the comment section what you guys think about that. I feel like I laid out a pretty coherent argument. So now, to close off the podcast, I'm going to take fan questions, people that follow me on Twitter, and I asked for people to drop suggestions, and a few people responded, and I'm going to talk about some of these. Some are easier to cover than others. Some I'm going to have to ignore because they deserve way more time, way more research, and I could probably do a whole episode on some of these questions. But yeah, the first one we're going to go over is a question from OG Trillmatic. He's asking if Zabit should get a title shot after the Holloway-Volkanovski rematch. I'm thinking no, he shouldn't. I'm still on the how does Zabit fare in a 5-round fight train because I don't really know. Every time that he's in a 3-round fight, he always looks way worse in the 3rd round. Always. So I'm thinking now he either needs one 5-round win or one more top 3 win. I think that if he beats another top 3 opponent, then him getting a title shot would be justified. And the next question is from Tap or Sleep MMA. He wants me to talk about why there's no difference in being a fan if you were watching in 2002 and if you started to watch because of Conor McGregor and Ronda Rousey. And I think the answer to that is pretty simple. Regardless of how long you've been watching MMA, as long as you're putting time into learning the techniques behind it and learning how fighters train and everything that's involved with MMA, it doesn't matter if you've been watching for 2 months or 20 years. It really does not matter at all. Because I interact with people on the daily who were watching Pride pay-per-views live in the early 2000s and still think that Rich Franklin would beat Robert Whittaker. Those people were so rooted in nostalgia, and they never cared to train themselves. They never cared to look at how the sport evolved and look at it from a technical level, that they still have these dog shit opinions. And they've been watching MMA 3 to 4 times longer than I have. So it doesn't matter how long you've been watching MMA. It just matters how knowledgeable you are and how open-minded you are to learn more. I still learn things every day. I had a discussion today before I recorded this about the cross arm guard and how that can be set up to throw elbows, throw knees. I didn't know any of this. I didn't know the basic concepts behind this, but I keep an open mind. I try to learn about technique every day, and I think that as long as you do that, then who cares when you started watching? Who gives a shit? So basically, if you came into the sport because you were watching Conor McGregor murk people, then as long as you're questioning how does he set up the left hand instead of, oh man, he's destroying people, and that's your only thought, that's your deepest level of thought about MMA, then yeah, I think that you're fine. And the next question is from Antho MMA, Muay Thai Chi. He wants me to talk about the applications for the Philly shell in MMA. And to be honest, this guy probably knows more than I do about like mechanics and technical stuff involved. He actually taught me more about the cross arm guard today, along with Ryan A. Wag MMA. Shout out to him. Both guys great analysts. But yeah, if you don't know, the Philly shell is commonly used in boxing. Floyd Mayweather is probably the most popular boxer of our generation that uses it. And in the simplest terms, the Philly shell is basically where you keep your rear hand up to block the left hook, parry the jab. Your right hand stays down to block the body, and you shell up and use your shoulder as sort of a third limb to protect your chin and deflect any right hands that are coming over the top. And obviously, if you're southpaw, this is flipped. But that's the basic concept of the Philly shell. Just type in Philly shell Floyd Mayweather if you want to see him using it. And you can instantly recognize when he shells up, look at where his hand positioning is and how he's using that into his defense. And he wants to know how that's applied to MMA. I really do think, and it especially just from how I watch film on defense, I think that the Philly shell is kind of useless in MMA. Not fully useless, but kind of useless because the gloves are so much smaller. That makes defense harder. There's no way to use a wide glove to block an incoming punch, so punches can easily get around your hands, and you don't need a punch to land flush to hurt you. So if you're leaning in a vulnerable position and there's not that extra glove width to block you, I think that the Philly shell can easily be bypassed, and that's probably why we don't see a lot of fighters implement it. We've seen Bobby Green do a variation of it, and Bobby Green's not that good, but he at least tries to do something like that. We saw Robert Whittaker do this earlier in his career against Colton Smith, and it wasn't even really a Philly shell. He didn't protect the body at all, but he kind of like shelled up. We've seen variations of it for MMA, but I wouldn't teach a fighter that's competing in MMA to do the Philly shell. I think that's more for like boxing or Muay Thai, and even with Muay Thai, you have more weapons that can penetrate the Philly shell. Like if you lean that much into a Philly shell in Muay Thai, you just get kicked in the head. There's all kinds of things that can get around it. I think it's best implemented for boxing, and I wouldn't teach a fighter that in MMA. Next question is by JB1 MMA. He said empty arenas, yay or nay? I am yay all the way because I think that that's awesome. I understand that you're going to generate less revenue without a live audience, so full crowds is the best way to go financially, especially for the fighters. They get underpaid already. But just the atmosphere of a quiet arena is just so amazing. That's why I love watching martial arts in foreign countries like Japan and stuff like that, because people don't scream. They will applaud when someone passes guard. You can hear every strike. But it also is cool because there's actual people there. They're just respectful of the martial arts. So whenever something cool happens, someone lands a big strike, you're going to hear the crowd pop just like you would in an American audience. So yeah, I'm all for empty arenas, but I understand how they're not practical. And the next and last question we're going to get into is from Smesh Jitsu Only. He wants me to talk about the concept of someone's prime as a whole, and how do you know when it's happening and when it's ending. I think that when an athlete is in their prime, it means athletic prime and also skill set prime merged into one. There are some athletes who hit their skill prime after their athletic prime. This is the case for a lot of heavyweights. I think that you know a fighter is in their prime when it really looks like they can deal with almost any situation that's thrown at them. Like Charles Oliveira is a really good example of this, a really good recent example of this. Charles Oliveira looks like he's in his prime because not only is he still a dangerous submission artist, but he doesn't quit. And he's developed a very good striking game. He's able to strike on the lead. He's able to counter strike. He can throw strikes in the clinch. he's really put it all together. And I think that when you look at Charles Oliveira now and compare him to how he looked when he was 19 in the UFC, you're like, hey, this guy's in his prime. You can identify noticeable changes. Henry Cejudo's a good example of this. He was always a well-rounded fighter, but I think he started to hit his prime when he realized, hey, I need to take advantage of my athleticism a little more in the striking department and adapt my style to something different. But I will add this. It is incredibly hard to really confirm they're in their prime, and actually I think it's impossible to confirm if someone's in their prime until they decline from it. It's very hard to tell if someone's at their best until we see them regress notably. I think Robbie Lawler's a good example. We know that his championship run was his prime, and now since he's noticeably slower, he doesn't have as much offense, we can say, hey, he's not in his prime anymore. And then we can point at moments in time where he was in his prime because we see that his performances were better. So I think it's really hard to confirm if someone's in their prime until we get evidence of them not being in their prime anymore, noticeably regressing. Some questions I'm not going to go over, but they were great questions. Was one from MMA Conscious that said, why Chad Mendes is better than insert popular fighter. Chad Mendes is so good, but there's just a lot of fighters that we can compare him to, and maybe I'll do that one day. And then Miguel Class, one of my best follows on Twitter, very knowledgeable guy. Why Chuck Liddell, Tito Ortiz, and Randy Couture are to blame for people thinking John Jones is the GOAT. That is a question that's not only phenomenal, but it's so good that I would be doing it an injustice by talking about it for like 5 to 10 minutes. There's an entire lineage, an entire history that we can go over here, and it's a great thought-provoking question. To sum it up, the popularity of Chuck Liddell, Tito Ortiz, really catapulted the light heavyweight division to people thinking that that's where the most skilled fighters are, and that's why people think John Jones is the greatest. And yeah, there's just so much you can get into there. I really appreciate that question, but I'm not going to dive into it that much. So yeah, this was episode 3 of the Listen to My Opinion podcast. Look at my opinion on Twitter. As always, this was Lamo, and I hope you guys enjoyed. Leave comments, give feedback. I need to get better at this, and every time you guys give feedback, it helps me get a little better. So yeah, let me know your thoughts, and have a good day, and stay home, guys.